We are in Judges chapter 7 this morning and continuing our study through the book of Judges. And we started last week the story of the saga of Gideon and his calling and all of his questioning. And we continue with him actually in his story with Judges chapter 7, and it is an extraordinary chapter, as I would say all of the chapters have been up to this point and will continue to be. But we will see that is another extraordinary one. Some miraculous things happening, and some more of those rated R violent things happening as we get down toward the end. But there's much to learn here in Judges chapter 7. Let me show you how I broke this down for you all. This is how the chapter is broken up. Shutting down pride in verses 1 to 8. And then we have stopping fear in verses 9 to 15. And then we will see some spiritual warfare, verses 16 to 25, that will certainly work its way out into the world and into this situation. So we'll see each of those divisions here. But let's start with shutting down the pride, which is verses 1 to 8. Shutting down the pride, which is absolutely necessary. Absolutely necessary whenever undertaking some task for God. You and I must first rid ourselves of pride. And God helps Gideon and the children of Israel and the army here. And I think that many of us know this story, but some details in here that perhaps you will be reminded of, or perhaps even God will use it to speak some new things to your heart. It begins in verse 1 with, then Jerubbaal, that is, Gideon. Now, Jerubbaal, Gideon, what is going on there? Well, in the previous chapter, Jerubbaal had actually, that's a nickname that Gideon's dad had actually given to him. What had taken place in the previous chapter was that God had called Gideon. Gideon was terrified. And the first thing that God called Gideon to do in this new life of faith, where he was going to be given commands by God, and then he was to work out those commands, live out those commands, put those things into practice. The first thing that he did was he told him to destroy his dad's altar to Baal. So his dad had an altar to a false god. The false god's name was Baal. And God had given instructions to Gideon, you need to go and destroy that, and then you're going to use a portion of that for a fire, and you're going to sacrifice to me on that, is what God told Gideon. You're going to sacrifice to me, but you've got to destroy that. It begins with the destruction of that altar to Baal. We've got God's thinking was we've got to show everybody, remind everybody whose God is the real God. So in the process of that, what happened was Gideon, at night, he goes and destroys that altar. The next morning, everybody wakes up in town, and the men from the town, they come looking for their altar to Baal, and they want to worship Baal. And they get there and they find out it's destroyed. And so they begin to question, and they find out that it's Gideon. And they actually told Gideon's dad, you need to bring your son out. We're going to kill him for what he did. And Gideon's dad, being inspired by Gideon's faith, replied to the men, listen, and this is a paraphrase, but if Baal is really Baal, and he's really a god, and if he's as powerful as you say he is or think he is, then let Baal plead for himself. Let Baal handle this. And so the name Jerubbaal, which Gideon's dad looked at Gideon and he said, you know what, from now on I'm calling you Jerubbaal. What does that mean? Well, it means let Baal plead. You can see the name Baal there in Jerubbaal, but let Baal plead. So every time he looked at Gideon, every time anyone saw Gideon in town, they looked at Gideon, they would understand, they would remember, oh, this all started with him destroying Baal's altar, and Baal didn't do anything about it. Why? Because Baal was not a real God. And plus, God was with Gideon. And so that's how he got that nickname, Jerubbaal. But his name is still Gideon. And what does it say there about him in verse 1? And all the people who were with him rose early and encamped beside the well of Harod, so that the camp of the Midianites was on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. So you have Gideon there with his thousands. We will find out as we continue reading, 32,000 people, guys, men who were ready to fight for him and with him alongside of him. In verse 2, we have the first of two steps in God shutting down their pride. And it begins with an evaluation in verse 2. There's an evaluation or an evaluating the situation. Now notice who does the evaluating. That's the important part, verse 2. And the Lord said to Gideon, the people who are with you are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel claim glory for itself against me, saying, my own hand has saved me. So the Lord evaluates the situation. And let's look at what he said first, and then we'll talk about who it was that was doing the evaluating. But the problem here in this evaluation is that you've got too many people with you, Gideon, 32,000. Now, it is we've got good reason to believe that the other army, the Midianites, the Amalekites, and all the people of the east is what we found in chapter 6. And we'll see it again in chapter 7. All those people, thousands, gathered against Gideon and the Israelites. And 32,000 is a lot of people, but no doubt the other army still had more people. But what happens is God says, listen, Gideon, you've got too many people. 32,000 is far too many. Because what will happen is, if you guys go out to war with 32,000 people, you are going to be victorious, but you're going to come back thinking that it was you guys, that you did it. You had so many people and you overwhelmed them. It was all you. And so God says we need to avoid that. And so he sets about the business of shutting down the pride. He's not going to allow them to be prideful about this. Now, what he does here is he evaluates, but what's more important than that is who's doing the evaluating. In verse 2, the Lord said to Gideon, it's God who's doing the evaluating. Now, wonderful lessons throughout this chapter, throughout the book of Judges, but throughout this chapter again. The first lesson is that whenever you and I are beginning some task for the Lord is calling us to do something and we're serving the Lord, it is always best to get God's evaluation of the situation or God's estimation. It's always good to submit our plans to God and say, God, I've got these abilities, I've got, this, I can do these things. What say you? What is it that, what does this look like to you? It is always best to allow God to have that freedom to evaluate. Now, what's going to happen here, I don't want to give the whole first portion away, but he's going to begin taking some people away, and we'll see how that happens. But the evaluation, it's got to begin with the evaluation. What does God think about my situation, my scenario? What does God think about myself? In chapter 6, when God called Gideon, told him what he wanted to do, Gideon came up with all sorts of excuses. Well, I come from the smallest, we're the weakest family, from the weakest tribe, I can't do this. Moses tried the same thing. You may remember the story of Moses, where God comes to call Moses and says, okay, I'm going to send you back to Egypt. You came from there, but I'm going to send you back. And you're going to lead the people out of slavery from Egypt. And Moses came up with all sorts of excuses. I can't do it, and here's why. And gave him all the reasons. The best known of those excuses was Moses said, I can't talk. You want me to lead these people, but I can't talk. I've got this speech impediment. I don't speak well. And finally God says, listen, you're going, and if you don't speak well, I'm sending Aaron to go with you, and he will be your mouthpiece. And Moses was out of excuses. You can't make excuses to God and expect him to go, oh, I am so sorry. I totally didn't even realize that I picked the wrong person. Let me go find somebody else. Let me go find someone with better qualifications. Or, I didn't realize that you don't speak very well. I must have taken a wrong turn, when I was coming into your neighborhood or whatever. God doesn't pick the wrong people. He knows exactly who you are. He knows what abilities you have, and he knows what abilities you lack. And believe you me, you lack more abilities than you have. Just to encourage you this morning. We all lack more abilities than we have. Here, he's got too many people. And God says, I'm evaluating the situation, and this is just far too many people. It's always best to allow God to evaluate my situation. Now, what he does in this scenario is, beginning at verse 3, he begins to excuse the soldiers in verses 3 to 8. Now, therefore, here's what God says. Proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained. That doesn't seem like a good enough reason to me. If I'm Gideon, I'm saying, wait a minute. Just because they're afraid, everybody's afraid at times, right? So just because they're afraid, we're going to send them home? But that was God's plan. If they're afraid, I want you to make an announcement. If they're afraid, they can go home. Now, can you imagine Gideon? You've got this huge group of men gathered up, guys. Okay, ladies, you know how the guys can be. Gather up, and then especially if you gather a bunch of guys together, all of a sudden, man, they want to show out for one another. Like, you gather some guys together, and you put, like, you're outside and you take, I bet you can't jump over that trash can. I bet I can. Okay, well, let's see. Okay, put another trash can. I bet you can't jump over two trash cans. We always want to outdo one another. I got the abilities. I've got the skills to pay the bills. And, this is what I'm going to do. And so you would think that when Gideon gets up and announces, hey, listen, everybody, 32,000, if anybody's scared, God says you can go ahead and go home. You would have thought that all these guys would have been like, scared, I'm not scared. What are you talking about? I'm not scared. But no, 22,000 of them. Like that. We're like, okay, bye. I'm going home. Like, yes, I'm scared. I'm terrified. I just imagine myself there, and I'm thinking, man, I am way too prideful to admit that I'm terrified and I'm going home. I'd probably be so prideful that, no, it's okay, I'll stay and go into war and die because I'm so prideful. But these guys were like, no. And it wasn't just a few that left. Did you notice the number at the end of verse 3? 22,000. And then it left him with 10,000. Now, if he did not have fewer soldiers than the enemy before this, he absolutely has fewer soldiers than the enemy now. He's left with 10,000. Now, you would think that that's, okay, good, let's go, we're going into battle. But in verse 4, God's not done yet. But the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Really? He says, bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Now, the good part is that God's going to do the testing. That's a good thing. The bad thing is, I've only got 10,000 left. God, how many more are you going to take? But God says, bring them down. I'm going to test them at the water. Then it will be in the middle of verse 4. Then it will be that of whom I say to you, this one shall go with you, the same shall go with you. And of whomever I say to you, this one shall not go with you, the same shall not go. So he brought the people down to the water. And the Lord said to Gideon, everyone who laps from the water with his tongue, as a dog laps. So whoever gets down and drinks water straight out of the lake or the river or whatever they were at, and just drinks it straight out, like a dog, slurp, 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 slurp. He says this in the middle of verse 5. Everyone who laps from the water with his tongue as a dog laps, you shall set apart by himself. Likewise, or in the same way, everyone who gets down on his knees to drink. And the number of those who lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, was 300 men. So the men that bent down and scooped water and brought it up to their mouth and drank, it says that there were 300 of those guys. In verse 6, right in the middle, says, but all the rest of the people got down on their knees to drink water. So 10,000 men are left. He says, everybody go down to the water, let's go, and I want you to drink some water. Now, imagine, I think of strange little things, just to let you know where my mind goes. Not that you care, but I'm teaching, so I can share this. I just think, what do you do if you get down there and the guys go, well, I'm not really thirsty. No, you're going to drink water right now, You get down right now and you drink some water. I mean, I don't know how this all worked out, but it's some of some of the aspects of it seem hilarious to me. But he takes them to the water. So some get down and they just drink out of the water like a dog, which some of you young ladies have brothers. You're like, yeah, that's not even surprising, right? That's not even surprising. And then there were others that scooped the water and brought it to their mouth. And he says, the ones that scooped the water, brought it to them, there's 300 of them, we're going to keep those guys. And then what does it say in verse 7? Then the Lord said to Gideon, by the 300 men who lapped, I will save you, and deliver the Midianites into your hand. Let all the other people go, every man to his place. When God is going to use us, there's a process that he goes through. And it's in 3 parts. He will take the person and then break the person in order to make the person. There's a process in which God needs to strip away our own pride, our dependence on self. Well, I've got the abilities to do this or that. Some of us, everybody thinks differently. Some of you are fantastic students. And then there are probably some of you in here who really struggle with that. You think differently. I really struggled as a student. Now, my big struggle was laziness, but still, there were just things that I had, and still to this day, things that I have a hard time comprehending. Some of you, not a problem. It is important that you understand that whatever abilities you have, that those come from God. You were born with certain abilities. Maybe those things have developed over the years as you have applied yourself. But there are other people who are trying to apply themselves, and it's just not registering. But maybe they're good at other things, and you all know that oftentimes you'll have people that are really good at book learning. They can sit in a class, hear something, and they just really grasp it. And then there are other people who are like, nah, that's not registering. I need something in my hands. Put a tool in my hands, or give me something to work with. And people just think differently. It's important to understand that whatever skills or abilities you and I have, that those come from God. It's not just because you were endowed with superpowers and you're so great and you really, earned it yourself. It's important. There is a stripping away process in that when I come to serve the Lord, he's got to strip away my pride. That's what he's doing. He's shutting down the pride. He's got to strip it away. So that I don't find myself becoming prideful and saying, well, I did it all, and it was my abilities, and it was my skills, and it was my knowledge. It is important that God gets the glory, and in order for God to get the glory, he then has to strip certain things away from us, and that's what he's doing with Gideon, and that's what he's doing with the 300. It's not just Gideon experiencing this, it's the 300. Can you imagine the 300? I mean, earlier that day, there were 32,000 of them. In an instant, there were 10,000 left. Then he says, let's go drink some water. And then he tells the 9,000 plus, all right, all you guys, you can go home. I mean, what were the 300 thinking? Like really, so is Gideon and us 300 and we're going into battle against the Midianites, the Amalekites, straight up warriors, and the people of the east? Really? What must they have been experiencing or thinking? What was going on in their minds? But there is that process of stripping away, and that's what God is doing here. And then in verse 8, it says, so the people took provisions and their trumpets in their hands. What is this, Mardi Gras? Where are they going? And he sent away all the rest of Israel, every man to his tent, and retained those 300 men. Now the camp of Midian was below him in the valley, but we're not done yet. Not ready for battle yet. Because the next thing that he does here, he goes from shutting down pride to stopping fear. That's important when you're going into battle. Now Gideon, he didn't have the option to go home if he was afraid. If he had the option, he might have gone home. But he didn't have the option. There was no option for Gideon to quit. Sorry, you're not going anywhere. So it's possible that those other 10,000 or 9,000 plus, they started with the first group, 22,000. Yeah, maybe they had the option to be afraid and leave, but Gideon didn't. So now God's got to deal with Gideon. And so it says in verse 9, it happened on the same night. Really? Because losing, 30,000 people all in one day, that wasn't enough, huh? So there's more. Oh, this is great. This is fantastic. Verse 9. It happened on the same night that the Lord said to him, arise, go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. But there's more. There's more to this. Now listen, you ever have those days where you wake up and everything starts to go wrong? And you go, you know what, man? My toaster strudel burned in the toaster. You know, I was getting a bowl of milk, poured out the milk, and instead of going, pouring out smoothly, it was like blump, 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 blump. The milk was rotten. And then I was going to go get dressed, man. And I went to my closet, and what I wanted to wear was dirty or whatever. And then, we get out to the car to take off, and the battery's dead. And things seem to go wrong throughout the day. And how do we most often respond? I'll tell you how I most often respond, so you don't have to answer. I most often respond with complaints. Why, God? Oh, God, why? But I don't mean, God, why did you do this? Please give me your purpose and your reason. I'm listening. I mean, oh, God, why? You don't know what you're doing. That's what I mean in my pride. But oftentimes there are those days of God stripping things away in preparation for something. But for many of us, we cannot get past the stripping away, the complaints. We're not receptive to that. But here on this same day, God's giving him all of these things, stripping away all of these things. Now, He's continuing to strip away here. Arise, go down against the camp, for I've delivered it into your hand. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Parah your servant, and you shall hear what they say, and afterward your hands shall be strengthened to go down against the camp. Then he went down with Parah his servant to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. Now, I do not know if you noticed it, but let me point something out. That's what I get paid the big bucks for. Okay? Now notice, if you go back to the beginning, in verse 3, what does God tell him? Now therefore, proclaim in the hearing of the people, saying, whoever is fearful and afraid, let him turn and depart at once from Mount Gilead. And 22,000 of the people returned, and 10,000 remained on. Did you notice what happened there? Verse 3, what did God tell Gideon to do? Talk to the people. Make an announcement. Now, that may not seem, you go, anybody can make announcements. Really? Do you really think that? Because if you think that, we can pull you up to the stage right now, and you can share our announcements with the group. See what I'm saying? Some of you are like, oh, God, please do not let Pastor Chris look at me and choose me. right? Like if I were to call your name out and say, hey, you got to come up and you got to do announcements, you might just shrivel and melt and just melt down into the floorboards under this trailer and disappear, and we'd never see you again. Making an announcement may seem like, oh, it's not a big deal. Really? You're just going to go talk to 32,000 people, huh? You see what I'm saying? But it is just an announcement. I just want you to go talk to the people. What's the next thing that he did? He told him in verse 4. But the Lord said to Gideon, the people are still too many. Bring them down to the water, and I will test them for you there. Look at verse 5. So he brought the people down to the water. It was a simple command. Talk to the people. So he talked to them. And then he watched God strip away 22,000 people. And then God says, okay, I want you to bring them down to the water. Now, if I were Gideon, I think I would have been like, the last time I did what you told me to do, you took 22,000 guys. Like, I don't think we're going to go with your plan anymore. Not that he had much choice. But what I want you to understand is that many people see Gideon as being this reluctant leader, and he was a reluctant leader. He was not excited to be the leader, at least not at the beginning. But even though he's just watched God strip away 22,000 people, and then God says, you still have too many, here's what I want you to do next, Gideon does it. That is faith. It may seem like a simple phrase. Verse 5, so he brought the people down to the water. But that is submission. Submission in its highest form. Gideon has just watched 22,000 people be stripped away, and yet he's willing to follow God. Okay, God, whatever you say. You want me to take them down to the water? I'll take them down to the water. And he does just that. And that is how God, being gracious, that's how he often works. He puts these opportunities, small opportunities in our paths, to exercise our faith. He doesn't just take us and, save us and go, okay, Chris, I've saved you. Now I want you to go fight the Midianites. No, there's always a process. There's always steps that he takes us through. Oftentimes you and I do not recognize those as opportunities to exercise our faith because they seem like, well, it's just simple stuff. I'm just being a servant at home. I'm just trying to bless my mom and dad. And you go, well, I don't know. That's not a big deal. It's just what you do. No, this is an exercise in faith. Well, I'm just going to serve in church, and I'm going to grab the vacuum, and I'm going to, it doesn't seem like a big, no. That's a step of developing your faith. And God will use those. And that's what he's been doing with him. But the Lord said to Gideon in verse 4, man, there's still too many. So in verse 5, he takes them down to the water. But I want you to notice the progression. First it was talk. Then it was lead your own people to the water. Look at verse 9. Arise, go down against the camp. You understand? It started with talk to the people. Next it was bring your own people down to the water. Now it's, I want you to go into the enemy's camp. I want you to go down into the enemy's camp. It's progressed. And as Gideon has responded in faith at each step, God then challenges him a little bit more. That's how that works. So you and I, what we want to do is to be faithful in what we would consider the little things or the small things. Let's be faithful in the small things. Be faithful in those things. And allow God the time and the space to develop our faith. So, the mundane, the daily, homework, studying, practice. All those things that we go, oh, this is boring. When's the exciting stuff? No, that is the exciting stuff. That's where God develops your faith in all those scenarios, all those situations. That's what he's doing with Gideon. And Gideon's responding by faith in every situation. I love it. And so he tells him in verses 7 and 8, hey, you're going to, here's how I'm going to save you. So beginning in verse 9, obviously, we have him stopping the fear. And he does it in two ways. He's going to, two parts in stopping the fear. First of all is with a promise in verse 9. It happened on the same night that the Lord said to him, arise, go down against the camp, for I have delivered it into your hand. You see the promise there? Go down against the camp. Here's the promise. I've already delivered it into your hand. It's already yours. You just got to go pick it up. Right? We're familiar with that ever since COVID. Right? What do? You just get on your app or you get online, you place your order, and then what do? You just pull up, they bring it to you, or you get out of your car and you just go pick it up. You're not going to go stand in line with all the common people. Right? I go straight to the front of the line over here and pick up my items. God's saying, listen, it's already been ordered. It's already yours. All you got to do is just go pick it up. That's it. Now, the second thing that he does is he gives him confirmation. So not only the promise, but also confirmation in verses 10 to 15. But if you are afraid to go down to the camp with Parah, your servant. Now, Gideon couldn't possibly be afraid still, right? Oh, he absolutely could be. And he says in verse 11, go down with your servant Parah, and you shall hear what they say. This is hilarious. God says, go into the enemy's camp, and I want you to eavesdrop. Right? You get in trouble at home for eavesdropping. Right? You can't be nosy. God's telling him, nah, I want you to eavesdrop. So he goes down verse 10, or rather verse 11. Then he went down with Parah, his servant, to the outpost of the armed men who were in the camp. So these guys are armed. Okay? But he says, I want you to go down. I want you to listen to what they have to say. Verse 12. Now the Midianites and Amalekites, all the people of the east, were lying in the valley as numerous as locusts. And their camels were without number, as the sand by the seashore in multitude. So it's just way too many to count. And here comes Gideon and Parah. Verse 13, and when Gideon had come, there was a man telling a dream to his companion. So these two friends are talking. So Gideon pulls up into camp, sneaking in, no doubt. And he can hear them talking. Look at what they say in verse 13. He said, I have had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and overturned and the tent collapsed. Now, we're going to get the interpretation of that dream in just a moment, but dreams are strange, aren't they? And I don't know if this is true, but I'm told that we dream every single night, but we only remember some of them. I don't know. I rarely remember my dreams. Although last night, I do remember, I actually had a dream that I was bald. So, whatever. I don't know. Maybe that's prophetic. Maybe I'm going to go bald. But whatever. But dreams are so strange, right? Be in a dream and like, You're in your dream, you're at the store with your mom, and then all of a sudden, what's the governor of California doing here or whatever, and you just have all these strange things that happen. But here, this is a strange one. This man explains, I had a dream. To my surprise, a loaf of barley bread tumbled into the camp of Midian. It came to a tent and struck it so that it fell and overturned, and the tent collapsed. Now, this is either a very large loaf of barley bread, or somebody needs to work on their baking skills, because if it's not large and it's just a normal size, then it's obviously very, very hard. I don't know which. But verse 14 says, then his companion answered and said, now look, this guy's going to give the interpretation. This is nothing else but the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. Into his hand, God has delivered Midian and the whole camp. See that? He gives the interpretation. This is incredible, because I believe, can safely assume that this dream came from God. But it wasn't given to one of the children of God. It was given to one of these Midianites or Amalekites or the people of the east. He has this strange dream. And maybe the guy that had the dream doesn't really know what that means, but he tells it to his friend. And then his friend, God evidently gave him the interpretation. And so he says, oh, that's Gideon. Now what happens is here's the result in verse 15. And so it was, when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and its interpretation, that he worshipped. He returned to the camp of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. You see, do you see the change here? Gideon was afraid, so he goes down with Parah, like God told him to, into the enemy camp. But he hears the dream, and what do we see in verse 15 right in the middle? He worshiped when he heard that. And then he returns to the camp of Israel full of faith. Arise, for the Lord has delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. The fact that he had previously 32,000 people, and now he's only got 300, means absolutely nothing. Absolutely nothing. Gideon is not afraid. He is not doubting God. He says with boldness there and surety, get up. The Lord's delivered the camp of Midian into your hand. We got to go. It's already ours. It's been confirmed. And people put a lot of stock in dreams. Oftentimes, maybe God does speak to us sometimes in dreams. Here's the challenge. The challenge is I've had lots and lots of dreams, but I've never had an interpretation. And there actually have been times where I prayed like, God, that was a wild dream. Are you trying to say something to me? And I've never had an interpretation. But not that, God did it lots of times. Can he still do it? I absolutely believe he can still do that. But here's what we have. Here's what I want you to understand, is that in order to stop the fear, God spoke a promise to Gideon, and then he confirms that promise. And God will take away your fear and my fear in the same way. He will speak to us his promise. What is his promise? The word of God. And then he will oftentimes give us the confirmation and say, no, this is really what I meant. Here's what I want you to see. But understand, notice what happened. When did Gideon get the confirmation? Gideon received the confirmation when he activated his faith and did what God told him to do. God said, listen, I'm going to give you I'm going to give you victory. And then he says, but if you're afraid, go down to the camp, the enemy camp, with your servant Parah. So evidently, Gideon was afraid because he did do that. But as he moved forward by faith, what happened? God confirmed it. See, God can speak to me, and then I can sit there shivering in my boots, and, oh my gosh, God's not going to do anything. And God's not going to do anything if I just stay sitting and I don't move. God speaks to me. I have to be willing to step out in faith and move forward. And then the confirmation comes. And Gideon is operating in faith here. A lot of people give Gideon a hard time, and he's going to mess up in the next chapter. That is the truth. But as he's following God here, he's doing so by faith, which, by the way, takes us into our third and final section, which is the spiritual warfare in verses 16 to 25. And it begins in verse 16 with going forward by faith. That's where spiritual warfare that's how it always starts. Then he divided the 300 men into 3 companies. And he put a trumpet into every man's hand, with empty pitchers and torches inside the pitchers. And he said to them, look at me and do likewise, watch, and when I come to the edge of the camp, you shall do as I do. When I blow the trumpet, I and all who are with me, then you also shall blow the trumpets on every side of the whole camp, and say the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. There's just a problem. The problem is, I'm supposed to say the sword of the Lord and of Gideon, but there's no sword. Okay, let's look at their weapons. Verse 16. Trumpet, empty pitchers. You don't even get. You can't drink no water. No, it's an empty pitcher. No Kool-Aid, nothing, just empty. And then torches inside the pitchers. I mean, this is. According to human standards, this is just getting more ridiculous as we go on. There were 32,000 people. Now there's 300. Now we're getting ready. Okay, 300. God's given us the victory. Let's go. And what does he hand them? Okay, everybody step forward. I want you, here are your instruments of warfare. You're going to get a trumpet, empty pitchers, and some torches. Again, what is this, Mardi Gras? Were we going to a party? What are we doing here? Empty pitchers, torches, and pitchers. There's no swords handed out. There are no spears. There are no shields. There's no armor. Now, whether the people had those things already or not, there's no mention of those things whatsoever. But again, there's the stripping away of our abilities, and then God giving us what we do need in order to accomplish the purpose for his glory, not my own. For his glory, not my own. So he gives them the instructions there. You're going to do what I do. In 2 Corinthians chapter 10, Paul wrote this. For though we walk in the flesh, we do not war according to the flesh. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for pulling down strongholds. We don't have actual weapons of warfare, swords and knives and shields and all those things. Verse 5, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God, bringing every thought into captivity to the obedience of Christ, and being ready to punish all disobedience when your obedience is fulfilled. What? It means that you and I are involved in spiritual warfare. And part of that spiritual warfare is that we do not use actual weapons to go out and fight people with swords and spears and shields and all of those types of things. It means that there's a spiritual war going on and we have spiritual weapons. And notice what these spiritual weapons do. For the weapons of our warfare are not carnal, but mighty in God for doing what? Pulling down strongholds. Casting down arguments. What arguments? Well, maybe it's arguments against God. I don't believe God exists. But maybe it's those internal arguments that you and I have. Oh, God, I don't think I can do this. I don't think I don't have the ability to do this, Lord. I don't have what I need in order to accomplish this task. Maybe it's those arguments, those self-arguments, those internal arguments where God is saying, no. You don't have those things, you're right, but I'm going to give you what you need. But he goes on, casting down arguments and every high thing that exalts itself against the knowledge of God. What could possibly exalt itself against the knowledge of God? I'll tell you what could exalt itself against the knowledge of God. The knowledge of Chris. Like, no, God, I can't do this. And maybe God the whole time is saying, no. I realize that in your own strength, no, you cannot do it, but I can do it through you. And so over the years, I've been teaching the Bible for a long time, a lot of years, and I've had a lot of encouraging people who will come and say, oh, you do such a great job, you teach the Bible well, and right now you're wondering who in the world would tell you that, but people have told me that. And I've had people tell me over the years, oh, you should start your own church, or when are you going to start your own church? Why in the world would I want to do that? But here's the challenge with that, is when people tell me that, I go, you know what, thank God. Here's what I mean. Not, thank God that I'm so great and you finally realized. Here's what happens in my mind. Every time. In my mind, I go back, I go back to junior high. And you go, what, junior high? Yeah. I go back to being a young boy in junior high and in high school, and purposely, I wasn't a Christian, purposely ditching class when it was time for oral reports, oral presentations. Because the last thing, there was only one thing that I feared more than death, and that was public speaking. But nobody knows that. Nobody knew me in junior high, so they don't know that. They don't know that. And now, this is all I ever want to do for the rest of my life. That's all I ever want to do. What happened? What happened was at 20 years old, I didn't have anything left, and I just said, God, I got nothing left. The preacher told me that I could give my life to you, and you'll take it and make something new. I got nothing. I've got dust and ashes, man. That's all I got. So you can have it if you want it. And what did God do? God took it like he did a man named Gideon. Fearful little man, remember? He was in the wine press. Remember that? He was trying to separate his wheat and his chaff, with no wind. He was like, oh, what was he doing? But God took him and began to develop him step by step by step by step, developing his faith. And that's what he's doing here. He sends him out with no weapons. No weapons, just a jar, a torch, a trumpet, It says in verse 19, so Gideon and the 100 men who were with him came to the outpost of the camp at the beginning of the middle watch, just as they had posted the watch, and they blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers that were in their hands. Then the 3 companies blew the trumpets and broke the pitchers. They held the torches in their left hands and the trumpets in their right hands for blowing, and they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And every man stood in his place all around the camp, and the whole army ran and cried out and fled. Absolute chaos. And in verse 22, when the 300 blew the trumpets, key phrase, when the 300 blew the trumpets. Let me reread that for you. When the 300 believed God and by faith blew the trumpets. That's what that phrase means. When that happened, the Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp. When they, by faith, blew their trumpets, that's all they had, blew their trumpets. The empty pot that they had, they just broke that. Nothing you can do with that anymore. When they activated their faith and blew their trumpets, God responded to that faith, and what did he do? God does what God always does. He fights for the faithful. I didn't say the perfect. I said the faithful. Those that, by faith, move forward, trust him. The Lord set every man's sword against his companion throughout the whole camp, and the army fled to Beth Acacia. So in other words, when that happened, God caused the enemy, they all started shanking each other. Everybody pulled out their sword and started killing one another. And in verse 22, and the army fled to Beth Acacia towards Zererah, as far as the border of Abel Meholah by Tabath. And the men of Israel gathered together from Naphtali, Asher, and all Manasseh, and pursued the Midianites. Then Gideon sent messengers throughout all the mountains of Ephraim, saying, come down against the Midianites, and seize from them the watering places as far as Beth Barah and the Jordan. Then all the men of Ephraim gathered together and seized the watering places. Those were key. You had to have water out there. As far as Beth Barah and the Jordan. And they captured 2 princes of the Midianites, Oreb and Zeb. They killed Oreb at the rock of Oreb, and Zeb they killed at the winepress of Zeb. They pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. There's the rated R part. They pursued Midian and brought the heads of Oreb and Zeb to Gideon on the other side of the Jordan. Oh, goody, thanks. Who wants those? And I mean, again, if this were a movie, some of you would not be allowed to watch it. Your parents would be like, there ain't no way you're watching heads get cut off, and brought to somebody. But here it is in the Bible. What is this? What happened? Again, it was God taking a person, breaking a person, making a person. It's the process that we've seen spelled out here before us. And it's not over yet. But this is how God does it. And so the lesson is what? The lesson is I want to be like Gideon and say, you want me to talk? I'll talk. You want me to take the people down? I'll take the people down. You want me to go into the enemy camp? I'll go into the enemy camp. Whatever you want, God. Whatever you want. You see, I can be a Christian and not give God everything. I can hold back. I can fight him. And say, you know what, God, that's scary serving you. I don't really want to do all that. I'll go to church. I'll read my Bible. I'll get involved a little bit here and there. But I can't fully surrender to you because that's scary. You might send me off to, some other country, to the Amazon or something. And I don't really like bugs, and humidity makes my hair frizzy. And I don't really want to do that. And the truth is that you can live out the rest of your Christian life not surrendering everything to the Lord, and you might even be successful. You might turn out with a good career, nice family, cute dog, some cute kids, nice car, pay your bills, live a safe life, and many years from now die and go to heaven. But if you and I do not surrender to the Lord, well, then we will never know all that God could have done. Had we simply said, God, I'm not my own, I'm yours. Take and do whatever it is that you want to do with me. That's what Gideon did. Now Gideon, maybe he was in a better place for that because he didn't have anything. And you know, when you don't have anything, there is a sense in which it's easier. That was me at 20 years old. I didn't have anything. So it was like, well, I can either give my nothing that I have to God, or I can just keep ruining it until there's absolutely nothing left. And so at 20, I said, here's what I've got left, Lord. And gave that to him. And then he took that and began to work. That's what he does. Takes a man, breaks a man, makes a man. But it goes for the girls also. Takes a lady, breaks a lady, makes a lady. What we want to do is we want to be like Gideon and just say, you know what, God, whatever you want me to do. You do it for your glory and for my good. It's all yours. I'm going to let you do that. So, Father, we thank you so much for this chapter. What a wonderful chapter.